So it's time we actually talked about what MMR means in terms of Dota. What it is your ability on average to influence your team into winning your Dota game. And why is it on average? And that's because there's variance. What variance is the randomness that occurs in Dota, and it's your chances to have terrible teammates, and it's your chances to have really good teammates who just happen to play better, even though they're the same MMR, or they just happen to play worse. The first variance limitation that's under your control is you pressing the find match button. By finding a game, you have picked that you are one of the 5 players on your team, and you get 4 allies and you get 5 opponents. And if you just don't abandon the game, there's a 25% higher chance that somebody on the enemy team abandons and gives you free wins. And you know, that's sweet, sweet MMR. You'd surely never give that advantage up, right? By abandoning, you'd never do that. If you're a 2000 MMR player and you're in a game with an average of 2000 MMR, everybody in there is 2000 MMR, that means both teams have a 50% chance to win the Dota game on average because of, again, variance. The winners get plus 25 MMR each and the losers get minus 25 MMR each and become 1k shitters. Now that's fair because the MMR is the same. That's the way that the game ranks you. How good or how likely are you going to win the game or influence your team to win the game versus your opponents? Now let's say you really don't want to become a 1k shitter. What you can do is you can try to help your team win the game at a higher percentage. So let's say your favorite hero is Vengeful Spirit. You play it a lot, you play it better than your other heroes. Let's say that when you play Venge, your effective MMR increases. Effective MMR is a term that I made up. I don't know if somebody did it before me, but I'm going to make it up now. And what it means is how you play that match. What is your effective MMR? Your actual MMR is 2000, but when you play Venge, you play at a 2100 rating. You play 100 MMR higher because you're just good at Venge. There's a lot of ways you can increase your effective MMR. You can change it by hero picks, you can change it by playstyle, you can change it by doing lots of other things like communicating more or trying to have better teamwork or not yelling at your allies, but really playing heroes is definitely the most talked about one. Picking the most OP heroes in the meta to raise your MMR, to increase your temporary effective MMR, to give your team a better chance to win. So let's say you do pick Venge, you're playing him at a 2100 MMR value. We'll say that gives you you and your team a 52.4% chance to win the game. You're gonna win, maybe you've got 52.4% chance. You could just completely lose, and that's variance. There are games that are arguably out of your control, or you're expected to lose. You will lose some games on your raise in MMR, and it's important not to be discouraged by that, because if you get discouraged by that, you're gonna play worse, and it's gonna affect your ability to raise your MMR anyways, right? So just accept that there will be some very bad games. So let's continue on that statistics path, and I want to talk about a very basic principle of statistics. Statistics shows us that when you take a chance on something like flipping a coin, that the more that you flip that coin, the more accurate your data is going to be to the percentage of likelihood. So if you take a coin that when you flip it, it's 50% heads and 50% tails, equally weighted, that if you flip the coin like 1,000,000 times, your percentage of heads and your percentage of tails is going to be very, very close to 50%. If you take a small sample size, like 8 or 10 flips, then you are much less likely to have a close to 50% ranking. So you want to think about Dota in the same way, really. If you're only playing 10 games, and this goes for placement matches as well, if you only play 10 games, you could just have 4 unwinnable games because you had a guy that abandons. But the reality is that on average, if you play enough games and you're not helping your teams abandon because you're just an asshole, then you should increase eventually your team's chance to win. Your opponents should abandon more often than your team abandons. So if we bring this back to the Venge example, if you're raising your team's chance to win by 2.4%, you will raise your MMR over time. If you play 100 Dota games, you should be winning 2.4 more of those games than you would have, because you're now playing Venge, a really strong hero for you. So the principle of effective MMR applies to every person in every game, and that's why MMR is so complicated and why it's so frustrating sometimes. So you have 10 people that pick one hero out of like 117 or whatever the heck we're up to, and then they have these huge swings in variance. Maybe they're not picking their favorite hero. Maybe they're picking a hero that they think is good, but they actually have no idea how to play. Maybe they're picking a hero that it already has the counters on the enemy team. There's a lot of variance like that changes the game. And it comes down to you as well, though. And that's really what you got to focus on. You are the only player that you can control in the games. You can suggest things to your allies. You can try flaming your opponents to make them play worse, but in reality, the person you have most control over is you. So to win your games and increase your MMR, all you have to do is play at an effective MMR higher than your actual MMR. If you play better than your effective MMR, you will increase your team's chances to win, guaranteed, if you play enough games. So let's take this Omni player. Let's say instead he's 3.5k, and he's trying really hard to hit 4k, so he just picks Omni Knight every single game. Well, every game that he plays Omni, like we said before, he's going to likely win more games than lose because it's a high win rate hero. But eventually he's going to hit the point where his win rate hits 50%, despite Omni's win rate being 60% when that guy started. On average, that's what it is for a player. Now he finally hits 4k and his win rate's at 50%. That means he's right where he should be. When he plays Omni and he plays Dota at a 3.5k level, he can get himself up to 4k MMR. And that means he's a 4k MMR Dota player. He's a 4k MMR Omni Knight. And yeah, you could say, well, he's only 4k MMR on Omni Knight. That doesn't make him a 4k player. That's kind of true, but it's kind of bullshit as well. You could pick out every player and say, I want to see your MMR levels for all 117 heroes, and I want to see all of your MMR levels for all of those 117 heroes at every single role in the game, and I want to see them all when you get Armlet. Let me see what your MMR can be at that. And the answer is that you can just endlessly talk about this stuff and talk about how many numbers you can assign to people, and if they really do deserve that 4,000 MMR. Now that we've defended hero spammers to hell, let's go back to talking about effective MMR and prove it with math. Now, like I said before, one way to temporarily increase your effective MMR is by picking heroes you're better at, but how much does that effective MMR spread actually matter? Well, it's actually pretty easy to figure out. We can take a look at a Reddit thread here. This is made by user Zenotha on Reddit. Just want to give a shout out to him. He calculated what MMR advantage corresponds to what MMR gain and loss. I'm going to link the thread down below if you guys want to see it. Now, what he did was he took data sets from his games that he played, and if you guys want to do this as well, I'd love to look at the data and analyze the curve and the graph. But what he did was he took games, he looked at the MMR spreads for the Radiant team versus the Dire team, he looked at how much MMR they won and lost when the game was over, and then with that you can make a graph. And this is the graph that I made using his data set. Again, shoutouts for his data. I removed the points where the MMR was like plus 45 minus 5 games because the curve clearly is adjusted, because at some point you could play games with a high MMR stack and get like 0 MMR, because again, the game has to round, so things aren't exactly accurate, but we can basically give these like best fit lines. And I'm doing this using OpenOffice. You can do this on Microsoft Excel. It's really easy. You're just adding a trend line. I used to do this in college all the time. And what this shows us is it shows us what the angle of the graph is. And by doing this, we can figure out what is the equation approximately that Valve uses to calculate what the MMR likelihood is, or what is the likely win rate for each team. So this is basically our trend fit line. I'm going to simplify it a bit to make it straightforward. It's going to be 0.06x plus 25 if you're winning, and if you're losing, it's 0.06x minus 25 if you're losing. The plus 25 is obviously your gaining MMR. The minus 25 is losing MMR, and that's your MMR gained or lost for the match. Now, what does X equal? X equals your team's average MMR compared to your opponents, but we needed to adjust based on these equations working for either the team that has more MMR on average or the team that has less. So we're going to make X equal to a new variable, V, and we're going to put a negative sign out front. That way, a team that's winning or expected to win, who wins, will lose. They'll gain less MMR total. So let's do an example. Here's a game where the MMR advantage is 50, or V equals 50. So X equals negative 50 for the higher team, and X equals negative 50 for the lower team. Obviously, that's going to be positive 50. So here's your win for a higher V team, 0.06 times negative 50 plus 25. That's going to equal negative 3 plus 25, which means a 22 MMR gain. It means they were expected to win, they won the game, they only gained some of that 25 potential MMR. For the other team, it's 0.06 times positive 50, which equals 3 plus 25, which equals plus 28. They were expected to lose the game, but they won, so they get extra. And the same thing works then if you lose the game. The negatives will still be there. It'll be negative 3 minus 25. You lose more than you expected. So our equations work out, and this is the one that I'm going to use to calculate all of our numbers. Keep in mind as well that these numbers do have to round. They round accurately, which means that our fit line is not going to be perfect. Some games you should have only lost 22.6 MMR, but instead they're like, oh, sorry, dude, you lost 23 MMR. So those are also going to exist, but on average, those will work out to be even in your favor. Now, the big question you're probably wondering, just how much MMR advantage increases my chance to win? So let's look at a simple 1 MMR increase. Let's say you play a game you're expected to win, and you get 26 MMR. How much more MMR did you have than your opponents to have that 1 extra? Well, to calculate that, we remove the 25s from the equation, and we'll just set 1 equal to 0.06x. So we can figure out how much that x modifier gets to that 1. To do that, we divide by 0.06 on both sides. This is now algebra, and we calculate the x equaling to, or v really, equaling to 16.66, and that's an average. So the winning team, if you're going to get 1 extra MMR than your opponents with a win, you had 16.66 MMR on average more than your opponents. That's it. That means as a team together, we can multiply that by 5, and that becomes 83.33 more MMR on your team total than your opponents. And you have a 2% increased chance to win, because again, every MMR you gain was a 2% chance increase to win. So it doesn't really take much to win Dota games. You just have to play at your effective MMR, have it be higher than your current MMR, and you can massively increase your chances to win. That also means that if you're playing at 5k MMR and you play on a 2k Smurf, you should never lose those games. There might be some cases where you're playing a hero that doesn't have scale potential, or maybe you're just bad at support at 4k. Maybe you play carries and now you're forced to support at 2k. You can still do that if you're a 4k support. You'll still win, but you have to win those games. So there are some outliers. Again, there's variance. You will lose some games because you get abandons, but having an MMR advantage on your team is a huge advantage. So let's get some more straightforward numbers. Do you want to know how much it takes for a 60% chance of victory? Well, we can calculate it. It's 83.33 more average MMR than your opponents, and you have a 60% chance to win. That's all it takes. 83.3 MMR on every single person on your team, 60% chance. You want to, let's see, an extra 10% chance. Oh, keep adding 83.33 together, or about 416 MMR spread across your team. An 80% chance of victory means that you have 250 average MMR over your opponents, or 1250 total MMR than your opponents do. So let's relate this to variance again and talk about Omni Spammers. If you're a 2000 MMR player and you have a 60% win rate playing Omni because you've gotten 2000 MMR by playing other heroes, you have a 60% chance to win. Hey, we can compare that to our MMR calculations from a moment ago. How much was it for a 60% win rate? It was 416 more MMR on one team than the other. And that means that we can calculate and realize that Omni can raise his MMR by 416 just by playing a hero at a 60% win rate. So the next game that he plays, after he raises his MMR by 25, his new win rate is now 59.398%. And he gains another 25 MMR, he's at 2050. Now his win rate's 58.78%. And the next win, he's at 58.18%, until his effective MMR finally matches his actual MMR, which should be around 2416. That will give him a 50% win rate, and that is how much Omni can potentially raise his MMR if he doesn't get better as a Dota player. If that streaks up to 3k, well, he's increased his Dota skill by about 600 MMR, and Omni has carried him maybe another 400. So now that you're at 2416 as an Omni Knight player, despite being 2k, that's your effective Omni Knight win rate. And really, we can calculate that for any hero that you play. And some people might be higher. Let's say an Omni player is just naturally talented at Omni Knight. He could raise his MMR by 800 because it really fits his playstyle. But that's really like matching up tool sets together. You can take a pro player and say wow, Eternal Envy was the best Ember player in the world at the Shanghai Major or something like that. And take that and say, okay, he was literally the best Ember player in the world. He played 8.5k MMR equivalent at that major. And then you can say, well, he's really bad at Terrorblade or something like that. It's like, who gives a shit, dude? He still was the best Ember player in that moment. It fit his skill set. Maybe Terrorblade doesn't fit his skill set perfectly. Maybe his MMR heights aren't quite as high there. The reality is that he was still that good. So try not to flame those hero spammers as much. So look, if you can't handle that this is how the numbers work, you don't understand how the MMR system works. As MMR goes up, it gets harder. A hero will not carry you endlessly. So let's go to the next video and finally talk about effective MMR in relation to your Dota skills.